Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of the Arizona Territory. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing to which places and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. The year was 1874. The Arizona Territory remained a wild frontier, barely a decade after being separated from New Mexico. A land of unforgiving desert, towering saguaros, and hidden dangers, both natural and man-made. In the southeastern corner of the territory, near what is now known as the Chiricahua Mountains, a strange account began to unfold. It started, as many such stories do, with a disappearance. 3 settlers, Thomas Holloway, Edward Reeves, and Joseph Martinez, had vanished while traveling between Fort Bowie and Tucson. Their wagon was found abandoned near Apache Pass, supplies untouched, no signs of struggle. The military report filed by Lieutenant James Gardner on April 17, 1874, noted only, "Wagon intact, no blood, no tracks, men gone as if into thin air." What made the disappearance particularly unusual was that it occurred during a period of relative peace, following the Cochise Peace Treaty of 1872. The Apache, under Cochise's leadership, had largely adhered to the terms of the agreement. What followed would become one of the most disturbing chapters in the territory's history, one that military authorities would deliberately obscure, and local newspapers would report only in fragments. A story of captivity, survival, and something far more insidious that would echo through generations of settlers and indigenous peoples alike. The 3 men were not random travelers. Thomas Holloway, 43, was a former military scout who had served in the Union Army during the Civil War. After the war, he had remained in the West, working as a guide and occasionally for the U.S. Army as a civilian tracker. Described in military records as taciturn but reliable, Holloway knew the territory better than most white men. His reputation had been built on an uncanny ability to read the landscape, to notice details others missed. According to accounts from soldiers who had worked with him, Holloway could track a man across bare rock, could tell how many days had passed since a campfire had been extinguished by the texture of the ashes. Born in Pennsylvania to a family of modest means, he had come west initially with the Army and stayed, drawn by the harsh beauty and challenge of the frontier. Edward Reeves, 38, was a businessman from St. Louis who had come west to establish trade routes. His correspondence, later found among his possessions, revealed a man ambitious to profit from the new territory. Letters to partners back east spoke of untapped markets and boundless opportunities. Unlike Holloway, Reeves was new to the West, having arrived only 6 months earlier. He wore suits despite the heat, carried a pocket watch on a gold chain, and kept a leather-bound ledger of all transactions. The son of a successful merchant, Reeves had expanded his father's business and now sought to establish a network of trading posts throughout the Arizona Territory. His letters revealed both ambition and a certain naivety about the dangers of the frontier. Joseph Martinez, 35, was of mixed Mexican and Pueblo ancestry, fluent in Spanish, English, and several indigenous languages. His skills as an interpreter had made him valuable to both the military and civilian authorities. Born near Santa Fe, Martinez had navigated the complex cultural and political landscape of the Southwest his entire life. Military records described him as indispensable in negotiations and possessing unusual insight into the customs and thinking of various tribes. Martinez had worked with Holloway on several previous expeditions and was trusted by both settlers and indigenous peoples, a rare bridge between worlds often in conflict. The 3 had been traveling together to negotiate supplies for Fort Bowie. According to the quartermaster's records, they carried no significant valuables, nothing that would attract common bandits. The purpose of their journey was to establish regular supply lines from Tucson to the fort, a routine but necessary mission. When they failed to arrive at their destination, A search party was dispatched 3 days later. The abandoned wagon was discovered, but despite extensive searching, the men could not be found. After 2 weeks, they were presumed dead, likely victims of a rogue band of Apache warriors who occasionally broke from Cochise's peace agreement. The initial search was thorough by frontier standards. Soldiers from Fort Bowie, led by Lieutenant Gardner, followed what tracks they could find. In his report, Gardner noted, tracks lead northwest from the wagon for approximately half a mile before disappearing on rocky ground. No sign of blood or struggle at any point. No evidence of Apache or other hostile presence in the area. The Apache scouts who accompanied the search party were equally puzzled. One, identified in military records only as Nahilzai, reportedly told Gardner, "This is not Apache way. Apache would take horses, take supplies. This is something else." Gardner's report also included testimony from a stagecoach driver who had passed through Apache Pass the day before the disappearance. The driver, Michael Donovan, stated that he had observed unusual activity in the hills surrounding the pass. "Not Indians," he clarified, "men on horseback. White men, I thought, though they were too distant to be sure. They watched the road but made no move toward us." Gardner noted that Donovan was known to drink heavily and considered his testimony unreliable. The matter might have ended there, filed away as another tragedy of frontier life, except for what happened 5 months later on September 28, 1874. A soldier from Fort Bowie, Private William Calhoun, was patrolling the perimeter of the fort when he spotted a figure staggering across the desert flats. In his report, Calhoun described the man as more corpse than human, clothes in tatters, skin burned beyond recognition. It was Thomas Holloway. The discovery caused immediate sensation at the fort. Holloway was immediately taken to the infirmary. The military physician, Dr. Samuel Wilson, noted in his report that the man was severely dehydrated, malnourished, and had numerous partially healed wounds across his body. "The patient bears evidence of prolonged captivity," Wilson wrote. "Scarification consistent with tribal markings, evidence of bindings at wrists and ankles. Patient appears to have been subjected to ritualistic practices not commonly documented among the Apache bands in this region." Wilson's medical examination was unusually detailed. He documented strange patterns of scarification across Holloway's chest and back, not random scars, but deliberate markings that formed geometric patterns and symbols Wilson did not recognize. "The wounds appear to have been inflicted over time," he noted, "with some fully healed and others still in various stages of healing. The precision of the markings suggests they were made with a finer instrument than the stone or bone tools typically used by indigenous peoples of this region." Most disturbing to Wilson were marks on Holloway's temples and at the base of his skull, small, precise incisions that seemed to follow the underlying structures of the brain. For 3 days, Holloway drifted in and out of consciousness. When he finally became lucid enough to speak, his account was so disturbing that the commanding officer, Captain Robert Hayes, ordered it to be recorded but classified. The transcript of this interview was filed away and largely forgotten until 1957, when historian Eleanor Chambers discovered it while researching military records of the Arizona Territory for her doctoral dissertation at the University of New Mexico. The interview took place in the fort's infirmary, with only Captain Hayes, Dr. Wilson, and a military clerk present. According to the transcript, Holloway was initially confused, uncertain of where he was or how much time had passed. Hayes began by asking simple questions, confirming Holloway's identity, the names of his companions, the purpose of their journey. Holloway's responses were clear and consistent with known facts, suggesting his memory of events prior to the disappearance remained intact. When Hayes asked what had happened after they left Fort Bowie, Holloway's demeanor changed. The transcript notes that he became agitated. His speech pattern altered. Dr. Wilson administered a small dose of laudanum to calm him before the questioning continued. What Holloway described was not a simple tale of captivity. According to his account, The three men had indeed been captured, not by Apache as initially presumed, but by a small band of Comanche who had ventured unusually far from their traditional territories. The Comanche, once the dominant force of the southern plains, had by the 1870s been largely confined to reservations in Indian Territory, what would later become Oklahoma. This group, Holloway claimed, had broken away from their people. "They took us at night," the transcript quotes Holloway. "Silent, like shadows. Martinez never even woke before they had him. Reeves tried to fight. They broke his arm with a single blow. I reached for my knife, but there were too many. They bound us, gagged us, and rode through the night. We traveled for what must have been days, moving only after sunset and before dawn, staying hidden during daylight hours." Holloway's description of the Comanche warriors was precise and detailed. He counted 7 men armed with a mixture of traditional weapons and modern firearms. "They were not dressed as I've seen Comanche dress before," he noted. "Their clothing was darker with fewer decorations. Their faces were painted in a way I didn't recognize, not for war, not for hunting. Something else." Holloway described being taken north and east into what would likely have been New Mexico territory, and possibly as far as the Texas Panhandle. The journey took approximately 2 weeks, during which the captives were given minimal water and food, just enough to keep them alive. What puzzled military authorities was why Comanche warriors would venture so far from their traditional hunting grounds to take 3 unremarkable men captive. The answer, according to Holloway's account, lay not with the Comanche themselves, but with their companions. They weren't alone, Holloway stated. There were others with them, white men, 2 of them, not captives like us. They rode alongside the Comanche, spoke with them as equals. One had a peculiar accent, not American, maybe German or Dutch. The other never spoke in my presence. This claim of white men living among and directing Comanche warriors was immediately treated with skepticism by military authorities. Such white Indians were not unheard of, captives who had assimilated into tribal life, traders who had taken native wives, or occasionally criminals fleeing justice who found refuge among indigenous peoples. But Holloway's description suggested something more organized, more purposeful. Captain Hayes pressed for details about these men. Holloway described the older one as approximately 50 years of age, tall and thin with a close-cropped gray beard and spectacles. He dressed like an Easterner, Holloway said, but his clothes were worn, adapted for the frontier. He carried a leather satchel that never left his side. The other was younger, perhaps 30. Dark hair, clean-shaven. He dressed more like the Comanche, but was clearly not one of them. His right hand was stained black up to the wrist, as if permanently dyed. The captives were taken to a remote canyon that Holloway could not precisely identify. Walls of red rock, he described, a stream running through, a cluster of structures, some traditional Comanche lodges, others built of stone and timber in a manner I've never seen before. Not Indian, not white man's work either. Something different. According to Holloway, the canyon was isolated, accessible only through a narrow passage that could be easily defended. Within the canyon were springs providing fresh water, sufficient grazing for horses, and evidence of long-term habitation. There were markings on the canyon walls, he reported, symbols carved into the stone. Some looked old, very old, while others appeared recent. The same symbols they later carved into our flesh. At this settlement, Holloway, Reeves, and Martinez were separated. Holloway was kept in a pit dug into the ground, covered with a wooden grate. From this vantage, he could observe parts of the camp but could not escape. What he witnessed during his captivity formed the core of his disturbing account. According to Holloway, the camp was home to approximately 30 Comanche, including women and a few older children. But the leadership came from the 2 white men, whom the Comanche appeared to revere. The older one, the one with the accent, they called him the Doctor. Holloway reported, "I never learned his real name." The younger man they called Black Hand, though whether this was a translation of a Comanche name or something else, I couldn't say. The relationship between these men and the Comanche puzzled Holloway. It wasn't like any arrangement I've seen between whites and Indians, he stated. Not trade, not alliance in the usual sense. The Comanche deferred to them, especially to the doctor. They brought him plants, animals, stones, things they found. He examined everything, made notes. Sometimes he would instruct them to find more of a particular item. They obeyed without question. What followed in Holloway's account was a description of activities that the military interviewer repeatedly pressed him to clarify. Holloway described the doctor conducting what appeared to be experiments or rituals involving both the Comanche and the captives. They would take one of us at a time, he said. First Reeves, then Martinez. They would be gone for days. When they returned, they were changed, quieter, distant, marked in ways I couldn't fully see. When pressed for details about these experiments, Holloway became agitated. The transcript notes several breaks in the interview where Dr. Wilson had to administer sedatives to calm the patient. What emerges from the fragmented account is a description of procedures involving plant-derived substances, bloodletting, and exposure to extreme sensory conditions, darkness, silence, or sometimes overwhelming noise produced by drums and rattles. The doctor kept records, Holloway stated, pages and pages of notes, drawings, measurements. He spoke to the other one about thresholds and limits of human endurance. He said they were mapping the territory of fear. That's the phrase he used, mapping the territory of fear. According to Holloway, the doctor believed that fear was not simply an emotion but a territory that could be explored and mapped. He said that most men live their entire lives on the borders of this territory, Holloway reported. They experience only the mildest forms of fear. But deeper in lies something else entirely, states of mind that transform a person completely. He believed that by pushing a subject to and beyond their limits of endurance, he could map this territory, document it, perhaps even control it. Edward Reeves was the first to succumb. According to Holloway, after several sessions with the doctor, Reeves became increasingly unresponsive. His eyes were open, but he wasn't there anymore, Holloway described. He would stare at nothing for hours. Sometimes he would mutter words that made no sense. Not in English, not in any language I recognized. When the Comanche brought food, he wouldn't eat unless they put it directly in his mouth. He became like a child, or less than a child, like an empty vessel. The transcript records Captain Hayes asking if Reeves had been drugged or poisoned. Holloway's response was uncertain. They gave us things to drink, he said. Brews made from plants I didn't recognize, but it was more than that. The doctor would speak to Reeves for hours. Questions, always questions, about his fears, his nightmares, his worst memories. Then he would leave Reeves alone in darkness, sometimes for days. When he returned, the questions would begin again. Reeves died approximately 3 months into their captivity. Holloway reported that his body was not buried, but was subjected to further procedures even after death. They took him to a structure at the edge of the camp, Holloway said, a stone building with no windows. I could hear the doctor's voice giving instructions. Later, they brought out bundles wrapped in hide. They buried these at different points around the perimeter of the camp. Joseph Martinez lasted longer. His knowledge of indigenous languages allowed him to communicate with their captors. According to Holloway, this seemed to make him of particular interest to the doctor. They would talk for hours, Holloway reported, the doctor asking questions, Martinez answering. At first, Martinez thought he could gain their trust, find a way for us to escape. But as the weeks passed, he began to change. He told me the doctor was not what he seemed, that he knew things no white man should know, ancient things, secret things. According to Holloway, Martinez confided that the doctor had knowledge of indigenous rituals and beliefs that went far beyond what any outside observer should possess. Martinez said the doctor spoke of ceremonies that even the tribal elders keep secret, Holloway stated. He knew words and languages that Martinez recognized but couldn't fully understand, old forms, ceremonial forms. Martinez became convinced that the doctor had studied with tribal shamans from multiple peoples, not just Comanche, but Apache, Navajo, perhaps others. The relationship between Martinez and the doctor grew complex. Martinez began to assist him, Holloway reported, translating, explaining cultural contexts. The doctor seemed to value this. He allowed Martinez more freedom of movement in the camp. They would walk together, deep in conversation. Martinez told me he was learning things, important things, that perhaps there was value in the doctor's work. This cooperation did not last. Martinez apparently attempted to escape 4 months into their captivity. He was recaptured within a day. What happened next, Holloway could only describe in limited detail, as he was forced to watch but kept at a distance. They brought him back to the center of the camp. The doctor said it was time for the final threshold. They gave Martinez something to drink, a dark liquid from a clay pot. Then they began a ritual unlike anything I'd seen before. Not Comanche, not any Indian way I know. The doctor led it, but the Comanche participated. They continued through the night. Martinez's screams eventually stopped before dawn. The transcript notes that at this point in the interview, Holloway became severely agitated, repeating phrases that the clerk recorded as the marks and the crossing. Dr. Wilson administered a stronger sedative, and the interview was suspended until the following day. When questioning resumed, Captain Hayes focused on practical matters, the location of the camp, the number of Comanche, the types of weapons they possessed. Holloway provided what details he could, though he admitted his sense of direction, and time had become confused during the captivity. He estimated the camp was several days' ride northeast of where they had been captured, possibly in the mountains near the New Mexico-Texas border. Hayes then returned to the fate of Martinez. Holloway's account became more coherent but no less disturbing. After the ritual, Martinez was different, he said. He could walk, eat, follow simple instructions, but he no longer spoke. His eyes, it was like looking into empty space. The doctor kept him close, observed him constantly, made notes, took measurements, collected samples, blood, hair, even scraping skin. The doctor called him the first successful crossing. According to Holloway, Martinez lived in this altered state for approximately 3 weeks. He grew weaker each day, Holloway reported, thinner, paler. The doctor seemed to expect this. He called it the consumption of crossing, as if whatever Martinez had become was burning through his physical form too quickly. Martinez died in his sleep, according to Holloway. His body was treated in the same manner as Reeves, taken to the stone structure, subjected to unknown procedures, then divided and buried at specific points around the camp. The doctor was not disappointed, Holloway stated. He told Black Hand that each attempt provided more data, that they were getting closer to understanding the mechanism of crossing and return. Holloway himself was apparently spared the worst of these experiments because the doctor had designated him as a control subject, a baseline against which to measure the changes in the others. He told me I was lucky, Holloway recounted, that I would be the witness, the one who would carry the knowledge back. He said, that was my purpose. This role as witness did not exempt Holloway from all procedures. They marked me, he said, referring to the scarification Dr. Wilson had documented. Each symbol had meaning to them. The doctor explained some of them to me. This one, he reportedly indicated a mark on his forearm, represents the threshold. This one, pointing to his chest, is the territory beyond. The marks on my temples and neck, those he said I wasn't ready to understand. According to Holloway, the doctor would regularly examine him, take samples, and ask detailed questions about his dreams, memories, and fears. He was building a map, Holloway said, not just of the land of fear, but of me, of my mind. He said each person's territory is different, shaped by their experiences, their nature, but certain landmarks remain constant. Certain thresholds must be crossed in the same way. After approximately 5 months in captivity, following the deaths of both Reeves and Martinez, Holloway described a change in the camp's routine. The Comanche began preparations for a journey. They were leaving, Holloway said, packing their belongings, dismantling the lodges. The doctor spent days burning papers, destroying some of his equipment. He selected certain items, books, journals, specimens, to take with him. The rest he destroyed. Holloway overheard conversations suggesting their destination was somewhere in the north, possibly the Dakotas or Montana Territory. The doctor spoke of new subjects with different cultural contexts. He seemed excited by the prospect, said it would allow him to test whether his findings were universal or culturally determined. On the night before their departure, according to Holloway, the doctor came to his pit. He told me it was time for me to fulfill my purpose, that I was to be the harbinger. He gave me water, mixed with something bitter. I tried not to drink, but I was so thirsty, so weak. The last thing I remember clearly is his face looking down at me. He said, "Tell them what you've seen, but they won't believe you. That's the beauty of it. The truth hiding in plain sight." Holloway woke to find himself alone. The pit had been uncovered. The camp was deserted. He managed to climb out and found that a pack had been left for him, containing a water skin, some dried meat, and a crude map scratched on a piece of hide showing the direction to the nearest settlement. Holloway estimated he walked for 3 weeks before reaching Fort Bowie, surviving on what he could forage and the occasional rainfall. The transcript ends with Captain Hayes asking Holloway if he had any theory about the doctor's ultimate purpose. Holloway's response, as recorded by the clerk, was cryptic. He believes there is something on the other side of fear, not courage, something else, a state of being that transforms a person completely, gives them power, understanding, maybe more. He called it evolutionary acceleration, said that what takes nature thousands of generations he could achieve in days or weeks, but it comes at a cost. Most don't survive the crossing. Those who do, they don't remain human, not in the way we understand it. Military authorities were skeptical of Holloway's account. The idea of rogue Comanche operating so far from their territory, in conjunction with mysterious white men conducting bizarre experiments, strained credibility. Captain Hayes initially suspected that Holloway had fabricated the story to cover some other truth. Perhaps the 3 men had attempted some illegal venture that had gone wrong, or Holloway himself had harmed his companions. However, certain details gave them pause. The unusual scarification on Holloway's body matched no known tribal patterns. Analysis of his blood revealed traces of unfamiliar compounds that the fort's physician could not identify, and most convincingly, when a patrol was sent to search for the site Holloway described, they found evidence of recent habitation in a canyon approximately 150 miles northeast of the fort. Fire pits, structural remains, and most disturbingly, human remains that the patrol commander, Lieutenant George Whitman, described as distributed in a manner inconsistent with either tribal burial practices or the work of scavengers. Whitman's patrol consisted of 12 soldiers and 2 Apache scouts. They departed Fort Bowie on October 5, 1874, following the general direction indicated by Holloway. After 9 days of searching, they located a canyon matching Holloway's description. Whitman's report, filed on October 18th, was factual but contained disturbing details. "The canyon appears to have been occupied until recently," Whitman wrote. "We found the remains of approximately 10 structures, some consistent with Comanche lodges, others of more permanent construction using local stone and timber. At various points around the canyon perimeter, we observed symbols carved into the rock face. These symbols correspond to the marks documented on Holloway's body. Most significant was what the patrol found buried at the edges of the camp. At 8 points forming a rough circle around the perimeter, we discovered buried remains," Whitman reported. "These were not complete bodies, but portions, specifically portions of human craniums, vertebrae, and long bones. The remains appear to have been deliberately arranged in specific configurations before burial." The Apache scouts refused to touch or even approach these sites, saying they were bad medicine. Within what Whitman identified as a stone structure at the edge of the camp, the patrol found further evidence. The interior walls are marked with the same symbols found elsewhere in the canyon. The floor bears stains consistent with prolonged exposure to blood or similar fluids. We recovered fragments of paper bearing writing in what appears to be German, along with drawings of human anatomical structures. Most disturbing was a collection of small glass vials containing preserved tissue specimens, each labeled with a name and date. The official report filed by Captain Hayes on October 30, 1874, concluded that Holloway and his companions had likely been captured by a band of renegade Apache, not Comanche as Holloway claimed. The report suggested that prolonged captivity and possible torture had affected Holloway's mind, causing him to conflate actual events with delusions. The case was considered closed. Holloway was discharged from the infirmary after recovery and reportedly left the Arizona Territory, returning to his family in Ohio. This might have been the end of the story, were it not for a series of subsequent incidents that, while seemingly unconnected at the time, would decades later form a disturbing pattern when pieced together by Eleanor Chambers during her research in the late 1950s. In the spring of 1875, a family of settlers was found dead near their homestead, approximately 40 miles from where Holloway's wagon had been discovered. The Weaver family, husband, wife, and brother-in-law, had established a small ranch the previous year. When a neighbor visited after not seeing smoke from their chimney for several days, he found all three dead inside their cabin. The official report cited unknown illness as the cause, though the neighbor's account, preserved in a letter to his sister in Missouri, described the scene differently, their faces frozen in expressions I hope never to see again, their bodies marked with symbols cut into the flesh. Not the work of Indians, at least none I know of in these parts. County records show that Sheriff James McPherson investigated the deaths. His report mentioned the unusual markings, but attributed them to ritualistic mutilation by hostile natives. No connection was made to Holloway's case. The homestead was abandoned, the bodies buried in unmarked graves on the property. In December 1875, a group of Apache led by a warrior named Tall Knife approached Fort Bowie under a flag of truce. Through an interpreter, Tall Knife reported that his people had encountered evil spirits in the form of men in the mountains to the north. These beings, he claimed, had attempted to lure young Apache men away from the tribe with promises of power. Those who went never returned or came back empty of soul. Tall Knife requested ammunition to fight these entities, which the fort commander denied, dismissing the account as superstition. The interpreter who facilitated this meeting, a trader named Samuel Jeffords, who had long relationships with the Apache, later wrote in his personal journal that Tall Knife's fear was genuine. "I have known this man for 7 years," Jeffords wrote. "He has faced Mexicans and U.S. cavalry without flinching. Yet when he spoke of these spirit men, he trembled. He showed me a drawing of the symbols they carve into rock and flesh. I recognized them immediately as matching descriptions from the Holloway incident, though I did not share this observation with the military authorities." Throughout 1876 and 1877, similar reports emerged from scattered settlements and indigenous communities across the region. Mysterious figures observed watching from a distance, unexplained disappearances, bodies found with unusual markings. Military patrols occasionally reported tracks of unidentified riders moving through the territory, always heading northeast when pursued. In August 1877, a remarkable document surfaced. A trader named William Bishop arrived at Fort Bowie carrying a journal he claimed to have purchased from a Mexican man in El Paso. The journal was written in German and contained detailed anatomical drawings, botanical sketches, and extensive notes. Bishop could not read German, but brought it to the fort, hoping to sell it as a curiosity. The fort's physician, who had some knowledge of German, examined it briefly and reported to the commander that it appeared to be the work of a scientific mind, though pursuing inquiries of a disturbing nature. The commander purchased the journal from Bishop for a nominal sum and forwarded it to military headquarters in Santa Fe. From there, the journal apparently made its way to Washington, D.C., where it was archived and forgotten. Bishop later provided additional information about the journal's provenance. In a sworn statement to a territorial judge in Tucson, he claimed the Mexican man who sold it to him was afraid of the document. He said it came from El Doctor Aleman, the German doctor who had lived for a time among the Comanche, Bishop testified. According to this man, the doctor conducted experimentos del diablo, devil's experiments. The Mexican claimed to have worked briefly as a guide for this German and his companion, but fled after witnessing a ritual involving a captured Apache warrior. He took the journal during his escape, believing it might have value, but later became convinced it was dangerous to possess. Eleanor Chambers discovered a reference to this journal in 1958 while examining military correspondence. After months of bureaucratic obstacles, she located it in the National Archives, cataloged not as a historical document, but as evidence in a now-closed military investigation. What she found confirmed aspects of Holloway's account while raising far more questions than it answered. The journal belonged to a Dr. Friedrich Vogel, a German physician who had apparently come to America shortly after the Civil War. The early entries described conventional medical research, but gradually shifted to investigations into what Vogel termed the physiological manifestations of extreme psychological states. Vogel wrote of disappointment with the constraints of traditional scientific inquiry and his decision to pursue his research outside the boundaries of conventional society. Chambers discovered that Friedrich Vogel had a legitimate scientific background. Records from the University of Heidelberg confirmed he had studied medicine there, graduating in 1852. His early publications in German medical journals showed a conventional focus on neurological disorders. However, after 1860, his academic output ceased. Immigration records showed he arrived in New York in 1866, but after that, his official trail went cold. The journal Chambers found began in 1868, with Vogel already in the American West. The early entries described travels through Texas and encounters with Comanche. Vogel wrote of his fascination with indigenous healing practices and spiritual beliefs, particularly those involving altered states of consciousness. These primitive peoples, he wrote, possess insights into the human mind that our civilized science has yet to grasp. Vogel portrayed this not as captivity or coercion, but as a mutually beneficial arrangement. He gained subjects and protection, while offering the Comanche knowledge and what he described as a path to power beyond their traditional understanding. He referenced a younger colleague or assistant, never named, but described as having an intuitive grasp of the methodology that occasionally surpasses my own. According to the journal, this assistant was an American who had studied briefly at medical schools in both the United States and Europe before being expelled for inquiries deemed unethical. Vogel described him as a natural experimental scientist, unbound by conventional morality or squeamishness. The journal suggested that while Vogel provided the theoretical framework for their research, this assistant devised many of the practical techniques they employed. They understand that fear is not merely an emotion to be overcome, but a gateway to be traversed. The later entries described an alliance with Comanche who had rejected reservation life. Most disturbing were Vogel's detailed accounts of experiments conducted on both willing Comanche participants and captured subjects. The descriptions aligned with Holloway's account, but went into scientific detail that a layman like Holloway could not have invented. Vogel documented the administration of plant-derived compounds, sensory manipulation techniques, and surgical procedures designed to induce specific psychological states. He meticulously recorded reactions, durations, physiological changes, and psychological effects. Chambers was particularly struck by Vogel's repeated references to what he called Die Landschaft der Angst, the landscape of fear. Vogel wrote of fear not as a simple emotion, but as a territory with its own geography, one that could be mapped, navigated, and potentially conquered. He believed that by pushing subjects to and beyond their psychological limits, he could identify what he called Die Schwelle, the threshold, beyond which human consciousness underwent a fundamental transformation. What lies beyond fear is not courage, Vogel wrote in one entry. It is something else entirely. A state of being for which we have no name. My subjects who cross the threshold and return are forever changed. Those who do not return, they may have reached a destination beyond our comprehension. Vogel's journal described a systematic approach to inducing extreme fear states. He categorized fear into what he called tiers, each requiring specific techniques to access. The first tier involved common fears, heights, darkness, pain. The second tier involved deeper, more existential fears, isolation, loss of identity, the unknown. The third and final tier, which Vogel called the territory beyond the threshold, involved states of consciousness he struggled to describe. The subject who reaches this state, he wrote, experiences a dissolution of self that is not death, but something more profound. The boundaries between individual consciousness and the external world become permeable. Time perception alters dramatically. Most significantly, the brain's capacity for pattern recognition and sensory processing undergoes a fundamental shift. Subjects report perceiving aspects of reality previously invisible to them. Vogel's methods for inducing these states were complex and disturbing. They involved combinations of plant-derived psychoactive compounds, many obtained from indigenous sources, sensory deprivation or overload, carefully calibrated pain, and psychological manipulation based on the subject's personal fears and traumas. Most disturbing was his development of what he called anchoring, the use of physical scarification to create permanent triggers that could instantly return a subject to a specific fear state. The symbols we carve are not arbitrary, Vogel wrote. They are based on patterns that the human mind instinctively recognizes at a level below conscious awareness. By inscribing these patterns on the flesh and simultaneously inducing specific psychological states, we create a permanent connection between the symbol and the state. Later, merely tracing the symbol with a finger can return the subject to that state, regardless of external circumstances. The journal entries corresponding to the time of Holloway's captivity were particularly detailed. Vogel documented his work with 3 new subjects acquired near Apache Pass. He identified them only as Subject A, Edward Reeves, Subject B, Joseph Martinez, and Subject C, Thomas Holloway. His clinical descriptions of their processing matched Holloway's account, but from the perspective of the experimenter rather than the victim. Subject A demonstrates remarkable susceptibility to sensory isolation, Vogel wrote. After only 3 days in darkness, he began to experience complex hallucinations. The application of the tincture derived from specimen 17, apparently a plant, intensified these hallucinations and directed them toward ancestral fears. Subject exhibited regression to childlike state within 2 weeks, promising candidate for deep threshold work. Of Martinez, he wrote, Subject B presents unique opportunity due to linguistic abilities and cultural knowledge. Initial resistance stronger than Subject A, but intellectual curiosity provides excellent manipulation point. Have begun sharing selected aspects of methodology to gain trust. Subject's familiarity with indigenous ritual practices provides valuable context for comparing effectiveness of various approaches. The hybrid methodology, combining Comanche ritual framework with targeted chemical compounds, produces stronger results than either approach alone. Holloway appeared in the journal as a deliberate control. Subject C will serve as our documentarian, Vogel wrote, physical and psychological baseline established. Limited processing only, sufficient to install anchor points but preserving cognitive function. Subject demonstrates extraordinary observational capabilities and memory retention. Will serve as ideal vector for disseminating preliminary findings in controlled manner. The final entries in the journal, dated July 1874, described increasing pressure from military patrols and Vogel's decision to relocate his research. He mentioned a new site already being prepared further east, where the authorities are less vigilant and the local population more suitable for our purposes. The journal ended abruptly mid-entry. Chambers attempted to trace Vogel's movements after 1874, but found no definitive evidence. However, she did uncover scattered reports from Kansas, Nebraska, and later Minnesota of incidents bearing similarities to those in Arizona Territory, unexplained disappearances, bodies with unusual markings, communities gripped by inexplicable fear. These reports diminished by the mid-1880s, suggesting either that Vogel had ceased his activities or had become more adept at concealing them. One promising lead emerged from county records in western Nebraska. In 1879, a physician named Frederick Vogel briefly established a practice in the town of Valentine. Local newspaper accounts described him as European educated and noted his particular interest in nervous disorders. After several months, however, Vogel abruptly left town following an incident involving a patient who reportedly died under his care. The newspaper account mentioned that Vogel had been accompanied by an assistant, described only as a silent man with a darkly stained hand. What became of Thomas Holloway after leaving Arizona Territory? Official records show that he did indeed return to Cincinnati, Ohio, where his sister and her family lived. City directories list him as residing at his sister's home from 1875 to 1878. However, neighbors reported that Holloway rarely left the house and seemed perpetually agitated, often staying awake through the night. In 1878, he was admitted to the Longview Asylum in Cincinnati, where hospital records described his condition as acute melancholia with paranoid features. Chambers located Holloway's admission records from Longview Asylum. The examining physician noted, "Patient exhibits extreme anxiety, particularly in darkness or confined spaces. Sleep heavily disturbed by nightmares. Patient claims to be marked and frequently traces patterns on his own skin, becoming agitated when prevented from doing so. Physical examination reveals extensive scarification across torso, limbs, and scalp, some appearing ritualistic in nature." Treatment notes from Longview documented a gradual deterioration in Holloway's condition. Initial attempts at conventional therapies, sedatives, hydrotherapy, monitored exercise, produced little improvement. The attending physician, Dr. Walter Keating, took particular interest in Holloway's case, conducting extensive interviews and documenting his observations. The patient's delusions, if they are indeed such, demonstrate remarkable internal consistency, Keating wrote in December 1879. His account of captivity and experimentation never varies in its details, unlike typical delusional narratives which tend to shift over time. Most curious are the marks on his body, clearly self-inflicted according to the previous physician's assessment, yet executed with a precision that seems beyond the patient's current physical capabilities. Keating became increasingly interested in the symbols Holloway had carved into his skin. He made detailed drawings of them and noted that certain symbols seemed to trigger specific reactions when Holloway's attention was drawn to them. "When I trace the pattern on his left forearm," Keating wrote, "the patient immediately exhibits signs of extreme terror, elevated pulse, dilated pupils, shallow breathing. Yet when I trace the pattern on his right shoulder, he becomes unnaturally calm, almost catatonic." It is as if these marks serve as keys to different emotional states. In early 1881, Keating's notes took a troubling turn. He began reporting his own unusual dreams and sensations after spending time with Holloway. "I find myself thinking of the patient's symbols even when away from the asylum," he wrote. "Last night I dreamed of a red canyon and woke with an inexplicable sense of dread. This morning I discovered I had drawn one of the symbols on my bedside notepad during the night, though I have no recollection of doing so." By April 1881, Keating had begun experimenting with recreating some of the procedures Holloway described. His notes mention obtaining plant specimens that matched Holloway's descriptions and attempting to produce the compounds Holloway claimed had been administered to him. Initial self-experimentation with diluted preparation yields promising results, Keating wrote. Heightened sensory awareness, followed by altered perception of time and space. Must proceed with caution at stronger concentrations. Keating's final entry, dated June 12, 1881, stated simply, "The threshold is real." H was telling the truth. "I have seen the territory beyond." 3 days later, Keating was found dead in his office at the asylum, reportedly from a self-administered overdose of laudanum. Among his effects was a journal containing drawings of the symbols from Holloway's body, along with extensive notes that the asylum administration deemed disturbing and unscientific. These materials were confiscated and apparently destroyed. Holloway died at Longview in 1882. The attending physician noted in his final report that in his lucid moments, Holloway would speak of being marked and insist that they would eventually come for him. In his personal effects was found a small leather pouch containing what appeared to be dried plant material and a folded paper covered with symbols that matched descriptions of the scarification marks on his body. These items were discarded after his death. Chambers discovered an unusual postscript to Holloway's story. Cemetery records indicated that 2 weeks after his burial, his grave was found disturbed. According to the police report, the coffin had been opened and the body removed. No suspects were ever identified, and the body was never recovered. The incident was attributed to grave robbers seeking specimens for medical schools, a not uncommon practice at the time. The Holloway-Vogel case, as Chambers came to call it, remains one of the most disturbing and least understood episodes in the history of the American Southwest. What exactly was Dr. Friedrich Vogel attempting to achieve with his experiments? Who was his unnamed assistant? What became of them after leaving Arizona Territory? And perhaps most unsettling, did they succeed in their goal of mapping the landscape of fear and crossing the threshold they sought? In 1963, Chambers published a limited academic paper on her findings, carefully framing it as a study in frontier psychology and the intersection of European scientific thought with indigenous practices. The paper received little attention outside specialized historical circles. When interviewed years later about why she didn't pursue a more comprehensive publication, Chambers replied, "Some doors, once opened, cannot easily be closed again. There are certain kinds of knowledge that perhaps should remain buried in the archives." Chambers' academic career took an unusual turn after her initial research. University records show that she shifted her focus from frontier history to the study of psychological trauma in historical contexts. Her subsequent papers explored how communities respond to inexplicable events and the formation of cultural taboos. Colleagues noted that she became increasingly interested in indigenous belief systems regarding altered states of consciousness, traveling extensively to interview tribal elders from various nations. In 1966, Chambers received a small grant to continue her research into the Holloway-Vogel case. She returned to Arizona, visiting Fort Bowie, by then no longer an active military installation, and attempting to locate the canyon described in Holloway's account. Local guides familiar with the region assisted her search, but no conclusive identification was made. However, during this expedition, Chambers encountered an elderly Apache man who claimed his grandfather had known of the place of the marked ones. According to Chambers' field notes, this man, identified only as John, related a story passed down in his family. "My grandfather was a young warrior when the white doctor came," John reportedly told Chambers. "This man spoke our language, but was not of our people. He asked many questions about our ceremonies, especially those that test courage and endurance. He offered trade goods for certain plants that our medicine people use. Some young men went with him, thinking they would learn powerful medicine. They never returned as themselves. One came back as a shell, walking, breathing, but empty inside. Our people killed him and burned the body, as he was no longer human, but a vessel for something else." In 1967, Chambers returned to the National Archives to review the Vogel Journal again for a follow-up paper. According to archive records, she checked out the document but never returned it. Her colleagues at the University of New Mexico reported that she came back from Washington, D.C., noticeably changed, withdrawn, suspicious, working behind locked doors. She resigned her position abruptly in early 1968 and reportedly moved to a remote property in northern New Mexico. No further academic work by her was ever published. Attempts by later researchers to contact Chambers proved unsuccessful. Property records confirm she purchased a small cabin near Taos, New Mexico, in March 1968. Local residents reported occasional sightings of her in town, purchasing supplies. Those who interacted with her described a woman intensely private and seemingly fearful. One shopkeeper recalled, "She always wore long sleeves, even in summer heat. Once, reaching for something, her sleeve pulled back, and I saw strange scars on her wrist, not like someone who had tried to harm themselves, but deliberate patterns." The final known communication from Chambers was a letter sent to her former department chair at the University of New Mexico in December 1968. The brief note stated only, "The territory is real, the threshold can be crossed, but what comes back is never the same. I understand now why some knowledge must remain hidden." The letter included a key to a safety deposit box in an Albuquerque bank. When university officials accessed this box, they found photocopies of selected pages from Vogel's journal, the original remained missing, along with Chambers' own research notes. Most disturbing was a sealed envelope containing a single sheet of paper bearing symbols identical to those described in Holloway's account, drawn in what appeared to be blood. University administrators, concerned about potential legal issues, sealed these materials in the university archives, where they remained largely forgotten. The final postscript to this story comes from an unexpected source. In 1969, a survey team from the Bureau of Land Management was mapping terrain in eastern Arizona when they discovered a small canyon matching the description in Holloway's account. At the site, they found the remains of structures and evidence of habitation consistent with a temporary settlement. More unusually, they discovered a series of symbols carved into the canyon walls at regular intervals around the perimeter, symbols that, when later compared to archive photographs, matched those described in both Holloway's testimony and Vogel's journal. Most disturbing was what the team found in a small cave at the northern end of the canyon, a sealed metal container holding a bundle of papers. The papers, badly damaged by time and the elements, appeared to be notes written in German, along with anatomical drawings. Before a proper translation could be completed, the papers were reported missing from the BLM regional office in Phoenix. The incident was attributed to routine theft, and no investigation was conducted. One member of that survey team, geologist Martin Rucker, later provided additional details in a 1982 interview with a paranormal research magazine. Though the publication's credibility is questionable, Rucker's professional credentials were legitimate. According to Rucker, the survey team experienced unusual phenomena while in the canyon. "We all had nightmares every night we camped there," Rucker claimed. Specific nightmares with shared elements, symbols, figures watching from the canyon rim, a sense of being examined. Two of our team became so distressed they refused to enter the canyon after the second day. When we found the metal box in the cave, none of us wanted to open it. It felt wrong somehow. Cold to the touch, though the day was hot. Rucker further claimed that after handling the papers from the box, he began experiencing odd symptoms, sensory disturbances, time perception anomalies, unexplained anxiety. "I would find myself tracing patterns on my skin," he said, patterns I'd seen in the canyon. "I sought psychiatric help, and the symptoms eventually subsided. But sometimes, when I'm falling asleep, I see the symbols again, and I feel as if something is waiting just beyond them." In 1985, a history professor from Arizona State University, Dr. Lawrence Martinez, no relation to the Joseph Martinez of Holloway's account, attempted to compile a comprehensive study of the Holloway-Vogel case. His research was cut short when he suffered a severe stroke that left him unable to communicate. His notes, recovered from his office, included translations of fragments from Vogel's journal and correspondence with individuals across the Southwest who claimed knowledge of similar incidents. Among Martinez's papers was a map marked with locations of reported sightings of individuals matching Vogel's and his assistant's descriptions between 1874 and 1890. The sightings formed a clear path northeast from Arizona into New Mexico, then north through Colorado, Wyoming, and eventually into Montana. The final documented sighting placed them near the Canadian border in 1890. After that, the trail went cold. Martinez had also compiled a list of unexplained disappearances and deaths along this same route during the same period. Most involved individuals living in isolation: prospectors, trappers, homesteaders. In several cases, remains were found bearing markings similar to those described in the Holloway account. Most disturbing was Martinez's discovery that local authorities often dismiss these incidents as the work of Indians, despite treaty-abiding tribes in the regions consistently denying involvement and sometimes reporting similar experiences among their own people. To this day, the full truth about what happened in that remote canyon in 1874 remains elusive. Was Dr. Friedrich Vogel merely a disturbed individual pursuing pseudo-scientific fantasies? Or did he discover something genuine about the nature of fear and human consciousness, something that continues to echo through the years, affecting all who come too close to uncovering it? The Arizona Historical Society occasionally receives inquiries about the Holloway-Vogel case. Their official position is that it represents an amalgamation of frontier fears and misunderstandings, captivity narratives, cultural conflicts, and the psychological trauma of life on the frontier combined to create a legend with little basis in fact. Yet they maintain a restricted file on the case, available only to credentialed researchers who must sign a waiver before accessing the materials. Indigenous peoples of the region have their own perspectives on the case. When approached by later researchers, tribal elders have generally refused to discuss it directly. One Navajo elder, speaking to an anthropologist in 1992, would say only, "There are some who know how to use fear as a door. This knowledge is not new, but those who enter without proper preparation and guidance bring back things that should remain on the other side." Your Dr. Vogel was not the first to walk this path, nor the last. We do not speak of such things, for speaking draws their attention. Perhaps most telling is what happened to those who studied the case too deeply. Eleanor Chambers disappeared from public life. Dr. Lawrence Martinez suffered a debilitating stroke. Various researchers who followed their path reported experiences ranging from nightmares to paranoia to unexplained physical symptoms. Coincidence, perhaps, or suggestion affecting impressionable minds, or something else. Thomas Holloway's final words, recorded by an attendant at Longview Asylum shortly before his death, perhaps offer the most fitting conclusion to this unsettling chapter in American history. The marks never fade. They watch from the edges of your vision. And when you finally stop being afraid, that's when you should be most terrified of all. The asylum attendant who recorded these words, James Whitfield, later became a patient himself. His admission records cited persistent delusions and self-mutilation. He was found in his quarters tracing symbols on his arms with a stolen pen. When asked what he was doing, he reportedly replied, "Mapping the way back. He showed me the territory beyond, and now I can't find my way home." In 1957, during renovations to the former Longview Asylum building, construction workers discovered a sealed metal box hidden within a wall of what had been Holloway's room. The box contained a journal, apparently kept secretly by Holloway during his confinement. Hospital administrators confiscated the journal before its contents could be widely known. One worker, who claimed to have glimpsed several pages, described drawings of symbols that made your eyes hurt to look at them, and writing that started normal but became something else entirely, not English, not any language I know. The journal's current whereabouts are unknown. Inquiries to state authorities and medical archives yield no information. Official records maintain it never existed. The true legacy of the Comanche captives and what they carried back from their ordeal may never be fully understood. Perhaps that is for the best. Some territories once mapped can never be uncharted again. Some thresholds once crossed allow passage in both directions. And some forms of knowledge, as Eleanor Chambers warned, are best left buried in the archives or in remote canyons where the winds whisper secrets to those who know how to listen. The symbols remain carved into stone and flesh, waiting for those who might trace their patterns and follow where they lead. Waiting beyond the threshold of fear, in the territory where what is human ends and something else begins. As for Dr. Friedrich Vogel and his assistant, history has largely forgotten them. But in certain remote communities across the American West, stories persist of strangers who come in the night. A tall man with spectacles and a younger companion with a blackened hand. They ask questions about local fears and legends. They take particular interest in those who live alone, far from help. They offer knowledge and power beyond ordinary understanding. And sometimes people go with them, never to return as themselves.